Welcome, everyone, to the Forensic Investigator Podcast, hosted by Dr. Jim. Now, today's topic is the forensic interview of children with our guest, Lindsay Wagner from Fayetteville, Arkansas. But before we get her in, let's get her into the business here and make her a picture here.
It works.
Hey, how about that? Actually works. Okay, good.
That's right.
All right, now, thanks for coming, Lindsay, spending some time with us.
Yeah.
Okay, I'm going to start off with reading a little bit about your bio and kick this off from there with a question or two. Lindsay Wagner is a licensed clinical social worker and therapist with experience in trauma-informed mental health care, clinical leadership, higher education, and child advocacy. She currently works in private practice therapy in Fayetteville, Arkansas. She earned her Master of Social Work from the University of Memphis in 2020 and her Bachelor of Social Work from the University of Arkansas in 2016. Throughout her career, she has developed experience in trauma treatment, child and family mental health, crisis intervention, and forensic interviewing. Prior to starting her private practice, Lindsay held multiple roles at the Children's Safety Center, including clinical director, contract therapist, and advocate/forensic interviewer/therapist. Well, that's a long one. Okay, in these roles, she provided therapeutic services to children and families impacted by trauma, supervised clinical programming, and collaborated across multidisciplinary teams to support child safety and healing. In addition to her clinical work, she has served as an adjunct lecturer for the University of Arkansas and the University of Arkansas at Fort Smith, where she teaches undergraduate social work courses and supports students in developing professional competencies within the field. Now, her professional training also includes a certification in advanced education and trauma-focused cognitive behavioral therapy and eye movement desensitization, I guess if I pronounce it properly, and reprocessing. Her background also includes trauma-informed research work in collaboration with Shelby County Juvenile Court System, which I'm assuming is in Tennessee, helping implement trauma-responsive practices with the juvenile justice system. Wow, that's a mouthful. All right, Lindsay, in a previous episode, I interviewed a child abuse expert who happened to be a colleague of mine and known him for years. And I want this session to sort of tag on to that because he talked about a lot of child abuse issues, and I want you to specifically get to me a little bit, give us all a feeling for what the forensic interview of children really is or are. And that said, start off with how you got interested and how this all came about.
Yeah, so I had to brush up because it's been about 3 years since I've done a forensic interview. I'm far from an expert, but I got introduced to forensic interviewing. You saw my long list of duties that I did at the Children's Safety Center. So in our particular, the Children's Safety Center is a child advocacy center. And within that model, there's forensic interviewers, advocates, and a lot of times, in our specific case, we had a mental health team as well. And when I started with them, all the advocates were cross-trained in forensic interviewing. And we did this for on-call duties. And so we had, and I'm sure in the 3 years that I've left, things could have particularly changed. But we had 2 full-time forensic interviewers, and then us advocates, again, we shared like an on-call schedule, and so it needed to be that we were prepared to do interviews if needed. And so we all went through a protocol called Child First, and I kind of hesitated. I went back and I was looking, and I was how far do we want to get into this? And I kind of landed on not going into too much detail about how to do forensic interviews in the sense of the actual steps and things like that, because and we've seen this before where sometimes people will see movies or listen to things and all of a sudden they feel like they themselves could, oh, well, I asked it this way, things like this, like, and the line gets blurred of who should be asking kids questions. And so with that same kind of mindset, Child First protocol is child-led. It's a way of interviewing children that is developmentally appropriate and non-leading. And this is really important, you know, this in the investigative process for it to be able to stand up in court. And what else do I want to say about that? There's a lot to that, but especially in the space of child advocacy centers, it's a nationwide model, and the idea of children's or child advocacy centers is that it's a child-friendly environment where the child is not going to law enforcement offices, they're not talking to somebody with a badge and gun, they're not talking to anybody that might feel like because they're not getting interrogated, they haven't done anything wrong. And
True.
even with, you know, I know a lot of like law enforcement offices now have like soft rooms where it's supposed to be a little bit more gentle. But when you're a kid and, you know, everyone's bigger than you and we have these, and maybe we grew up in an environment where we don't have a great relationship with law enforcement or whatever it might be, we really want to make sure that kids feel safe. And the big thing too around Child First is it can be used outside of children as well. I mean, because it's designed to be developmentally appropriate for that level of cognitive functioning. So, you know, there's been times where we've interviewed adults with cognitive disabilities or some sort of disability that might do better in a child setting versus in kind of an adult harsher setting.
Are you talking about autistic kids when you say that, or autistic
or
people?
Like or like any sort of like intellectual disability where potentially, you know, language or how they process information or process language back to you might be a little bit more difficult. And you can stop me at any point, but I could go on all day about child advocacy centers.
Yeah, no.
Yeah.
No, I no, you're right, and there's a historical perspective here that I'll throw out there initially, and then if you'll tag on to that, it seems like in the late '80s, early '90s, we had some cases that occurred across the country that caused some very severe problems, and they were basically inappropriate interviews of children. They were misleading, is one thing you said about, and the key of having open-ended questions, for example, and so on. But you have to understand who you're talking to first and a little bit about them. And sadly, law enforcement as a whole doesn't really know how to do that.
Right.
Especially with children. And I'll add to that in their favor, I think something too. I mean, 18,000 police agencies, 80% of them have 25 or less officers. That means the funding is low, the training is less, and you just can't expect them, you know, to be able to handle it the same way they do with regular criminals. That just doesn't work, period. And I think the ones that the McMurtry, I guess it is, whichever, it was one of the cases from California, and it was just horrible, and it all got reversed because of the inappropriateness and the suggestiveness of the interviews that were conducted. So, do you want to add to that any at all?
Yeah, I mean, I think that you're hitting on a lot of key points there. Even talking about different roles. So, and I think this is a positive thing. I don't think we should all be playing the same roles. Like law enforcement has a very specific role. Like Child Protective Services has a very specific role. Advocacy centers, like advocates, have a very specific role. Nurses there, and you know, through that lens of child advocacy centers, that's the beauty of it. You have a multiple disciplinary team for a reason, because everybody's good at what they do, and that's important. And we want you to be good at what you do and not have to kind of go into this other space where someone else might be maybe a little bit more equipped to do it. And those dual relationships, like it's hard to, because everybody has a job. Law enforcement has a job to uphold the law, and that might look like arresting somebody these kids love. That's confusing. And another piece of that too is where I wanted to go with that. I had a thought and I lost it, but just the importance of understanding that kids aren't necessarily on the same timeline that we are, and building trust can take a long time with kids. And when you use the child advocacy model, right, they're building those relationships with those advocates throughout, like, beyond the case. They're beyond that. And these therapists, if there's therapists at the particular center. So what can happen a lot of times, too, is, like, the importance of bringing kids to an advocacy center where they can be interviewed, do the forensic interview, is that it's going to be geared towards them. Everything's child-friendly. But it's also going to be connecting them with these relationships that could potentially help down the line with cases. Because I can't tell you how many times kids will go into the room because it's non-leading. Like, it has to be up to them to provide information, essentially, like, if they're ready. And they don't feel safe enough. They don't know, maybe, that what they're experiencing. I'm going to use sexual abuse as an example. They don't know what they're experiencing is incorrect or against the law or things like that. Everything's normal to them because that's the home that they've grown up in. So what will happen
Go ahead. Go ahead.
I was just going to say that that's establishing those relationships that law enforcement, like you said, you can't, like, keep up with everybody that you come in contact with. That's true. That's not their job. But when we build relationships with law enforcement at advocacy centers, and we have a relationship with these kids, later on, like, sometimes they're like, hey, this thing happened. And I told nobody that it did, but it did. Like, and I was scared. I thought someone was going to get in trouble, or I didn't know what this was until, I was older, because I didn't have the language and the words for it. And so I think that's a big piece, is a lot of times people be like, oh, well, it's a waste of time because they didn't make a disclosure. And I just don't agree with that, because there's a reason why this kid has made contact with either, CPS or law enforcement in general. There's something that's getting us there. And so no matter what, it's a good outcome for this kid because they're getting these relationships that will be protective down the road.
All right, let me ask you a couple more questions here. Are you seeing, well, let me phrase this a little differently. We were always law enforcement oriented on the interviews, and then times changed, and then we started reaching out to social workers, which is psychologists more, and so on. Mm-hmm. Is this still a big thing? I mean, is it going on a lot across the country? The utilization of people such as yourself versus the police to do the initial interviews of these children?
I think it's a lot more prevalent, right? Especially since, like you said, the kind of creation of these concepts. I think it's a lot stronger. I think there's a lot of things that are barriers to maybe always using these services. It being convenient. It's a lot more convenient for someone to go and interview a kid at school or at their house or all these things than, like, getting them to a center.
Feel safe, yet at the same time it's neutral. Am I right?
Well, and that's a good point. Like you just mentioned, I just mentioned, like, doing interviews at, like, schools or homes. Well, if I'm at school and I'm like, man, do I have to go back to class after I just talk about the worst thing that's ever happened to me? I'm not going to say anything. Yeah. If I'm at home where the abuse is happening and the person that's abusing me is in the room next to me, you think I'm going to say something and risk this? Like, there's a lot of risk in telling. And this is why I always, like, try to remind people, when a kid makes a disclosure, that's the biggest risk that they're taking, is saying that something is happening. Because I think a lot of times, right, there's this, like, oh, kids they're unreliable. They are, no, very few. There's some outliers. There's always outliers in life, but very few. The risk is always greater to say something than to not say something. And so I always like to remind people of that. And I think we brought this up maybe when we were working on the book, about, like, in the investigative process. I think sometimes too, like, obviously I'm talking a lot right now about, like, sexual abuse, neglect, like CPS and stuff like that. But it's also been, like, if a kid is present for a crime, if they witness something or in the home or, things like this, like kids see stuff. Kids see stuff and they remember and they notice a lot more than adults realize. And sometimes because of developmental, where they're at developmentally, they don't know that they're not supposed to say anything.
Yeah.
And so, sometimes they are like, oh yeah, like I see my dad, hit my mom, stuff like that. Like they don't even think about, oh yeah, Uncle Joey was here and Uncle Joey was like, was not supposed to be there. And so kids are a huge tool.
Okay, let me ask you this. Were you on contract with the city or the county or something to conduct these interviews for the police, or were you doing it separate from them?
Separate. So the structures of child advocacy centers is it's a nonprofit. It's not attached to the state or, like it's by choice. Like it's by relationships with this MDT. The prosecutors, law enforcement, and then there's also sexual assault nurses. And so the idea though is that it's convenient because it's a one-stop shop. Like you're getting everything right there. You're not having to re-interview these kids 5 times because that's how stories change. That's how things get, the leading questions, the things like that. And they can be viewed all at the same time. So you can have, there's different setups in different locations, but like there's a viewing room. So everybody can see what's happening without having to,
And it's recorded, right?
And it's recorded. Mm-hmm.
Yes. Okay. Visually, I mean, a video or just sound?
Both.
Both. Okay. All right. And so you would get involved and then you would then get with the police, or were the police watching?
Typically they're watching, right? So,
okay.
And again, different levels, right? Like cuts, bruises, welts, things like that. They're not like legal charges. That's where they stay at with Arkansas State Police or DHS. And then you've got higher level of abuse. So what happens too, there's a child abuse hotline. Hotlines will be made. They get either screened in or screened out, right? Accepted or not accepted. When they're accepted, then they go to the appropriate departments, and it's up to those people to then reach out to the centers to set up services.
Okay, do police, do they come to you and say, will you interview a child as well for them?
Yeah, typically that's how it goes. Like we wouldn't be reaching out and be like, hey, we want to do this interview with this kid.
They would come to you and say, we have a situation, we'd like for you to start the interview or whatever. Mm-hmm. Okay, that means though that someone's telling them to do that, or else they got more faith in you. Which is it?
Right. Both.
Or both.
It's relationships. And that's why there's MDT coordinators where at the time I was there, it was every other week you get together and you go over cases and is there any more developing information? Where are we at with these things? And everybody's coming together because we know this. And this was a part of, the work that you guys did even with the investigative book is like, how do we make it streamlined? How do we, the more hands and phone calls and things get lost and dropped and and it's really that team effort to keep those cases and those families in contact with the people they need to be in contact with.
And for those that are listening, the book she's referring to, is I've mentioned in a couple other episodes, was where I pooled together a group of detectives around the country to put together a set of guidelines for conducting homicide investigations. And it was basically a not-for-profit thing because we've been giving them away to cops all over the country for the last 3 years now. But anyway, that's what she's referring to because she contributed to it as well. Okay, the testifying in court, you've been having to do that as well?
Knock on wood. Knock on wood, I have not had to do that. But yes, that's for those that are doing forensic interviews full time or longer and more frequently than I was. Absolutely, that's a big part of it. And that's another great thing too about Child First Protocol that we went through. There's trainings and ongoing trainings and continuing education and access to resources about how to prepare for court. Again, in our particular advocacy center, we had a mentorship program where you went through training and then you were mentored by another forensic interviewer. And that's a key process of that. Like you would prepare for your role, you reviewing like the interview, what happened and things like that. And a lot of times there's there's not a lot. We're not investigators. We're not sexual assault nurses, things like that. So there's, as far as being an expert, it's going to be more of a support of that child versus, oh, here's, you're just explaining your job. You're not necessarily having to come up with, you're not investigating facts or things like that.
And you're just actually telling them what you learned from that interview. Exactly. And actually, is the interpretation of it then is probably up to them more than it is anything else.
Exactly. And just being able to say, like, here's why I asked this question, maybe, that might be kind of thing. Here's why this was requested of me to by law enforcement or by whoever to get this kind of information. So. Okay.
Have you heard of? I'm just hits my mind. Cognitive interview. You heard of that? How?
Tell me
okay. Well, no, not right now. No. It is another topic, and then when I get to doing some things about interviews, but I will mention a couple of things about it. The Brits have used it for years, and I don't know so much for children, but it's really been helpful with sexual assault victims. Okay. Because it helps them define what really happened. Mm-hmm. Because you ask them at one point, you gave me a story, which is what you asked for in the beginning. Just tell me what happened. That's it, and see what they say. But then in timeline issue, you'll go back to maybe 3/4 of the way through that and tell them, okay, go back now from this point and tell me what you remember.
Yeah.
And that's part of the cognitive interview. Is that something
similar structure? And again, like, I don't want to I'll kind of go briefly over
I understand
what the steps are. I get very hesitant about because then parents will
I understand your concern there. That's okay.
And now I know how to do this. But yes, you're starting with rapport building, right? Then you transition the kiddo to the topic of concern. So, and then you're exploring details and closure. But when you're exploring details and you're doing exactly that, you are kind of, how do I want to say this? You're clarifying essentially the order of things, the chronological order. And time is difficult for kids at different developmental stages. You talked to a 3-year-old last month and it was last night. The idea of time can be really difficult for children. But that's part of that rapport building, is you are showing, prior to getting to the topic of why they're there to be interviewed, you're showing their abilities prior to that. So it can't be that they got the timeline wrong, so it must not be true. When you're actually, they got the timeline wrong on what today is. Yeah. They themselves don't know. It's not that they're lying, it's that they don't have that ability. But practicing what we call narrative recall. So that's also happening this rapport build. You're talking about a mundane thing. What did you do today at school? And seeing how they chronologically tell a story, so you can get an idea of, okay, now we know for reference, this kid can do beginning, middle, end. And I would kind of use that example sometimes of hey, like a book, there's a beginning, there's a middle, there's an end. Tell me about the very beginning of this. And one thing too, this is sad truth, when you've experienced what we call complex trauma, more than one event, more than one time, it gets confusing. When did this happen? It's happened to me so many times. There's so many different things that have happened to me. I'm having a hard time remembering, because you're essentially dealing with somebody who has trauma symptoms. Okay. And so we would focus in on a time that was different, a time that was worse, things that you could kind of pinpoint that stick out. Because people don't think about that too. It's if you've lived 8 years on this planet and you've been being abused for 7 of those years, it's hard. Your brain is not developing correctly.
Correct. Absolutely right. Now, I guess the training has been pretty well widely accepted. I've read through some of the material, and I mentioned it to you too earlier. And a lot of the references go back to that national health thing, NICHD, I think it is, about child development. Was that, okay, Was that meant just for social workers and psychologists, or were they intending for that to be also a tool for law enforcement?
For
I'm curious.
for
The interviewing
Oh,
strategy.
absolutely. So when you do training, like again, we did child first, and there's different protocols, different models.
Yes.
I was trained in child first. Yeah, you've got law enforcement that's trained in it. You've got sometimes prosecutors will will sit in and like understand the process, right? You've got DHS, what we call it DHS here, CPS, and people. Yeah, so like that's more than one person can get trained. And here's the next deal. We talked about like this is best case scenario. Kids are being brought to us, but there's also like sometimes you got to do the next best thing. And if law enforcement is what's available and what needs to happen, then they need to be trained as well. And well, it just made me think because like in Arkansas too, we're a little bit different in the fact of like Arkansas State Police. There's non-commissioned investigators. So a certain level of child abuse, it bumps up to our, what we call ASP, Arkansas State Police. And so I'm not sure if other states do that.
Well, no, no. Some states elevate different crimes different ways. Yes, Massachusetts was when it came to death cases, they had control over all of them, unless they occurred in Boston or Springfield, who could handle their own. So yeah, there are. It depends on what state you're in, and it works differently how they do that. The line of questioning, and I'm going to do a couple of segments later on interviews and using the book, by the way, as probably my guidelines. Yeah. But we're going to talk about a lot of because I still believe that a lot of the mistakes that we do have, sadly, they're made out of not knowing how to do it otherwise. You know what I mean? They didn't have the training, or they didn't have enough of it, or they don't have enough experience, and that's hard to do, again, when you're in a small agency. Now, although I don't think Fayetteville's probably too small, it's probably a good-sized department.
And our advocacy center, is all of Washington County. So we're talking about multiple law enforcement, agencies.
So you work with a lot of different agencies. Did you have to work with the feds any, or just state and local? Feds too? Okay, good. All right, no. That's interesting. Is this a field, an opening for someone who, say, is maybe not in law enforcement that wants to get involved in these kinds of cases? If they became a social worker or did the education and training, is this the kind of thing they could find themselves in? Is it possible?
Absolutely. Is a great, obviously, I have an interest in law enforcement, and what am I trying to say here? Justice, what I want to say here. What is the term? But it's a great way to, I'm not going to go down the law enforcement avenue, but I want to be of service, and I want to like work together with these people. Yes. And I think that's a big piece too that is super important, is you hit the nail on the head. If there's lack of resource, if it feels like I'm the only one that can get this done, that's when things start to kind of crumble. But using each other is so, I've seen it work beautifully when everyone's, like I said at the very beginning, everyone's doing the thing that they're really good at, and that provides the best service for those families.
Okay, let me ask you, it's a personal one probably, but you can refuse to answer it if you like. How do you separate your own personal self from this?
Yeah, it's
from these cases that you deal with.
So hard. And obviously, like, once I had kids, I stopped working with kids. I was like, I'll come back when, it just hits a little too close. And it's hard. But this is what I've always, I worked with a lot of interns and little baby social workers, and a big thing that this stuff is going to be happening whether I'm helping or not. And I feel better about doing what I can to know that I'm doing my part, right? These horrible things would be happening to kids anyways. At least I know, there's this, it's really fulfilling because you see justice happen, not all the time. Those are the hard ones. But you see people getting help, and you see it get better a lot of times. And so for me, it was always better than the alternative. It's either we're here helping these kids, or these kids don't have, it's still happening and they don't have any help at all.
Yeah, I've dealt so long with death cases and attended, I don't even know how many autopsies, but the autopsies that always bothered me the most were children.
Mm-hmm.
That was the hardest ones for me to endure, was being there for that. But I had a job to do, and I did it. But I did manage not to take it home with me, if you understand what I'm saying.
Mm-hmm.
I managed to keep it. I mean, maybe it's buried somewhere. It's going to explode one of these days, you know.
Well, we do like little tricks like that where, I have a name tag and I'd be really intentional about like, okay, it's kind of like a service dog. Like, I put this name tag on, I'm here to do a job. I take this name tag off, I'm off duty. And really trying to separate those things.
And police officers have to do that all the time too. But yes, basically, yes. Although they are technically always a police officer. But you're right. When the badge comes off for the evening, you need to separate your life a little bit. Otherwise, you're going to be in trouble eventually in time.
Yeah.
How does your husband respond to all this? How does he handle it? It's a personal question again.
He knows what he's signing up for. Absolutely. Yeah, no, it's hard. And it's a specific, I think anybody that's married to somebody that is working, like even doctors, nurses, like anything where you're experiencing things that, you see people on the worst day of their life, right? That's your job. Your job is seeing people on the worst day of their life. That's a hard career. Yeah. And I think it's understanding, that the work is meaningful and the work is like, you have to be passionate about it. Like there has to be a reason why you're doing it. But I would say that people can do this long term and because of the support from friends and family. Like this is like understanding their job and supporting them. I think there's a huge component of resiliency and sustainability of that kind of work.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. Okay. All right. Is there anything else you want to share with us before I'm going to hit on a couple other things?
Yeah. No, you hit on some things that if I think of something, I'll say something.
Okay. I just think one way the best, there's a definition here I wanted to throw out there, and probably should have done it in the beginning, but that's all right. A forensic interview is a structured, neutral conversation designed to gather accurate information from a child about alleged abuse or violence, while at the same time minimizing the trauma. And I think that's a fairly decent definition of it. And it's got to be child friendly. They've got to feel safe. The questions have got to be actually you want to minimize the trauma in the environment, of course. They are crucial, of course, to advocacy centers, people like you and others, and law enforcement. And I think law enforcement can learn a lot from this, especially when they don't do it every day. See, that's the other thing. The other guy I had on there, Don Hayden, who did the child abuse investigations, he made the comment, he says, I've done 500, 1,000 interviews maybe over the last regarding children in my career. Mm-hmm. But people like you who do it every day and not just once a week, maybe with law enforcement, that's where the experience really lies, because you have a lot more experience at it because of it. Oh, yeah, I know what. One other thing. Do you use any kinds of toys, tools, anything like that, physical items to work with?
So, and again, it might be set up differently now. I always like to disclaimer.
Okay.
But we'd have a board in there, and that's like where we write our name, and that was also like and things like that. They're anatomical dolls, which I actually never had to use those. And there's like this is people's career, so you can go on to get additional trainings and become really an expert in different tools within the interviewing. But yeah, and kids need to move, gotta move around. And so a lot of times, I would have kids, they're in there coloring while I'm talking to them, just because it's a little bit of a distraction. It's a little bit of, or fidgets. Kids would play with fidgets, just something to do. Had pets in there. After I left, or I guess right around the time I left, our advocacy center actually got mental health dog. And so, a lot of times they want the dog in there just to pet and kind of touch. And
That's good.
Make them feel good. Yeah.
Are you going to come back to this later in your life? Are you looking at it, doing that?
Maybe. I don't know. Private practice is a pretty sweet gig.
I bet it is. Oh yeah, I'm sure it is. Sure it is.
I got to the point a little bit where I was like, man, I am spending more time with other people's kids than I'm spending with my own. And through the lens of how do I put out good humans in the world, I want to spend as much time with my little humans. Yeah. So that's how I justify it in my head. I'm like, I am helping society by making sure my kid is good. So
no, and I want to go back to the doll thing for a minute. There were a couple of cases I know where dolls were inappropriately used. Mm-hmm. Okay, so there again, it gets back to the training of how do you use these tools.
Absolutely.
Without being suggestive.
Absolutely. And I think this is one piece that we didn't talk about that I think is really important. One of the things about Child First is that you are peer reviewed.
Yes.
So I think it was like every quarter. Again, I don't know, remember how often we were peer reviewed, but you get together with other people doing interviews. So that includes law enforcement, that includes DHS, that includes, we would meet up with other advocacy centers in the area and we peer review. And you go over, here's what I would do different. Here's what, like you would present the case. And then your peers would tell you the same thing. Here's what you did really well. Here's what you need to do different. And it's extremely helpful. Again, you talked about like, if people are doing this every single day, you get some bad habits. Some bad habits and things happen. So it's a great way to stay, up on your skills.
All right. I'm going to close this down. But before, I want to thank you for sharing your experiences and expertise. I'm glad we were able to do this. It was definitely nice. But before we go, I think it's necessary that we wrap up this by revisiting some of the key principles, starting with another definition for the forensic interview of children. Now, according to the American Professional Society on the Abuse of Children, a forensic child interview is a structured conversation led by someone who is specially trained to talk with kids. The goal is to gather accurate information about possible harm, things like abuse, neglect, or exposure to violence, while at the same time staying sensitive to the child's age and developmental needs. The interviewer must remain neutral, keep things as a low stress as possible, and carefully document what's shared, since that information may be used later in a legal setting. At its core, best practice is pretty simple, in that we talk with children in spaces where they feel safe. Ask open-ended and non-leading questions, and allow the kids to tell their story in their own words and at their own pace. Interviews are often recorded so children don't have to repeat their experiences over and over again. When agencies work together through a multidisciplinary team that could include child protection, law enforcement, medical and mental health professionals, prosecutors, and child advocacy centers, it helps to ensure the child is supported every step of the way. Now, this all matters because how a child is interviewed can affect both their well-being and the quality of the information gathered. One well-conducted interview can reduce stress, limit repeated retelling, and help professionals better understand what happened so the right support and next steps can happen quickly. And remember that jurisdictions are not all the same, and that the interview practices we see, they continue to evolve. And many communities now rely on child advocacy centers to provide coordinated child-focused care that prioritizes safety and well-being, even when a case isn't formally labeled as abuse. I want to take this time to thank everybody for listening, and please join us for the next episode. And remember, if you have any questions about this podcast or the forensic services mentioned in this session, please email me at jma.forensicinvestigator@gmail.com, or you can visit my website at www.jma4ensics.com. Goodbye, everyone, and thanks.